Hello, friends. This is Ravi Zacharias. I thank you so much for listening to our program on the air. I've just returned from Indonesia. My wife was with me, and she went on to Papua New Guinea. She'd always wanted to go into that part of the world. There was a 100-year-old man there who met her along with his children who are missionaries, and he said, I listen to Ravi's program every day. He was visiting Papua now and lives in the United States, listening to our program every day. 2 days ago, somebody wrote to me and said a 6-year-old little girl in a doctor's waiting room saw her listening to a program and heard the voice and said, I listened to Ravi Zacharias, as she said, rather than Ravi. And I know him. My parents and I listened to the radio program. Do you know how delightful that is to my own heart? A 6-year-old, 100-year-old. But this program costs. We have a team, we have radio engineers, we have a director of our programming, all of this. We couldn't do it without your support. Please be generous in standing with us in this program. We need that support to carry on this radio ministry, and I'm grateful. Hopes are dashed. Suddenly, you faced it. You lived through it. This is not the way it was meant to be. There's a gap, isn't there? There's a gap. And we say, oh God, fill this gap.
Living through difficult times can cause a gap between our human understanding and God's infinite purposes. For many, the gap is so great they never find their way back. How can we mind the gap and stay close to God? Find out today on Just Thinking with author and apologist Ravi Zacharias. If someone you love dies unexpectedly, the pain and confusion might cause you to ask God, why? After all, He could have prevented it, right? Today on Just Thinking, we're in the middle of a series by Ravi Zacharias titled Mind the Gap, in which he talks about the struggles that come when disappointments hit. How should we handle it? Here's Ravi.
There is a second thing that I want to tell you about, and that is the gap when the hopes are dashed with disappointments. So it's not just knowledge not in keeping with reality, but hopes become dashed with disappointments. I remember when I lost my dad. I lost my mom when she was 57, I lost my dad just 5 years after that. And the world never looks the same. You never stop needing your parents. I remember one thing that happened which crushed us so much, and it's not meant to be critical. I think it's the way things go sometimes. There was somebody in our room who kept believing my dad wasn't going to die. He was on a respirator for several days. He wasn't going to die. Somehow he had this intimation, he said, that Dad wasn't going to die. Well, Dad did. And all I say is, I remember my brothers, my sisters, all of us, and the sense of dismay we had. And most disappointed was the one who really thought he had the intimation that it was not going to be this way. Remember John the Baptist? When he was put in prison, he calls his disciples and says, why don't you go and talk to him? Is he really the one we're to be looking for? And if he's the one we're looking for, what am I doing here? And Jesus says this, go back to him and tell him this, the blind receive their sight, the lame are walking, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor. Blessed is the person who does not fall away on account of me. What he's really saying is, John, I can do the miracle. Do you not see that? Blind are seeing, dead are being raised, the deaf are hearing, leprosy is being cured, the lame are walking. The problem is not my inability to perform the miracle, John. Don't stumble at me when your desires are being dashed, when they're being shattered, and you say to yourself, why did this happen? I remember when I was overseas and Nancy, who's worked all these years for me, knew exactly where I was, so I would need to hear this. And in one line, she just sent me the message that I should call Sammy Dagger, because a young man by the name of Radwan Dagger, Sammy's nephew, had suddenly died. I was stunned. I was in the Malaysian International Lounge when I read it. I said, this has to be a mistake. So I called at that hour. Yes, he'd passed away. And I say this to you without exaggeration. In 31 years of travel, if I were to take a sheet of paper and put down the names of some of the grandest Christians I met, Radwan would be somewhere near the top. We supported Radwan. This ministry gave him a scholarship. He was a prince of a guy, so humble, so gentle. And yet, Sammy was, I think, somewhere in Iraq or something, and he phoned Radwan and he said, we've got to do something here, Radwan. We've got to do something here. Radwan says, Uncle Sammy, leave it with me. I'll have a strategic plan by the time you get back. 2-3 hours later, Sammy gets this phone call. Radwan's been rushed to the hospital with some kind of a viral infection on the brain. He went unconscious. 7 days later, this 37-year-old young man was dead, leaving behind his young widow and 2 children, 10 and 7. Sammy and I have been friends for over 25 years. Nothing daunts Sammy. He cried on the phone and he told me, this is the loneliest moment in my life. For 17 years I've poured my life into Radwan because I'm old now, I'm tired. He was to take over from me. He said, Ravi, it's my responsibility now to take care of a young widow and her 2 children. I cannot believe this has happened. Hopes are dashed. Suddenly, you faced it. You lived through it. This is not the way it was meant to be. There's a gap, isn't there? There's a gap. And we say, oh God, fill this gap. You see, in the first instance, when knowledge is not in keeping with reality, the gap comes down to the fact that we do not have the knowledge of God. But now when it comes down to this struggle, what we need to bear in mind is that we do not always understand the purposes of God. We do not always understand the purposes of God. And ladies and gentlemen, what I say to you is, we don't have the knowledge of God. We don't always have the purposes of God. And thirdly, there's a gap when presence is suppressed by preoccupation. One of the grandest passages in New Testament writ is this. I don't know of anything so sweeping in apologetics as this statement from the Apostle Paul in Acts 17. Listen very carefully to what he says. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. Listen now, please. From one man he made every nation of men that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. He did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from any one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. You see what he's saying? In the natural framework, our very being and our movement is because he pervades the very reality in which we walk. And he made all of us to dwell in a certain land by design. He raised you in America, and you are not far from him. He raised me in India. I was not far from him. In Africa, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in Cambodia, you find stories again and again and again of men and women lying alone in some places and crying out and finding out that God was nearer to them than they had ever realized. But his presence is suppressed by preoccupation. F.W. Borum says there are really 2 basic heresies that have come from long time ago, right from the beginning. The first is the heresy of there-ness. The second is the heresy of here-ness. Only Borum could think up such things. The heresy of there-ness, he says, comes from Adam. God is out there, but not here. So he hid from him. The heresy of there-ness, that God is there, but he's not here. The second is the heresy of Cain, the here-ness, but not there. God is here, but he's not there, so I'm going to go out from the presence of the Lord. You see, David found out a long time after that you can't do that. Remember what he said? As David sounded that warning to us, he said, where can I go from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, you are there. If I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me and your hand will hold me. David, as the friend of God, found that out. Nebuchadnezzar, as the enemy of God, found that out. He throws these 3 boys into the flames, and all of a sudden he says, just a minute, guys, didn't we put 3 in there? I think there's 4. Like unto the Son of Man. So he says to them, why don't you boys come on out? If they really had a sense of humor, they'd have said, just a minute, guy, you put us in here, you come in and get us out. No. Those 3 found out that he was with them in the flames. He is there, even right in the thick of it. Ernest Shackleton, who was that great explorer, always carried with him 2 things, the Bible and the words of abide with me. I need thy presence every passing hour. And he knew the words so well. And when he was buried in one of those exploratory expeditions, those were clutched by him, the Bible and the words of abide with me. When I was a teenager, my dad decided we needed to study the Bible. My dad didn't, we needed to. Two people knocked on our door. They said they were Christian people. And they arrived and they introduced themselves. We are witnesses of Jehovah, and we would like to talk to you about who Jehovah is. So they gave us their book, Let God Be True, and they gave us their magazines, The Watchtower and Awake, and we used to get together, the five of us, every week. I dreaded that moment because I had to give up cricket in order to study this. But there they would come, still remember their names, and he would always begin by saying, 1 hour's a solid study will do for the day. I wanted to say 1 hour is 59 minutes too long. Let's get on with this. But you know, something began to happen. I began to believe what they were teaching me. They'd show me films of thousands of people gathering in Yankee Stadium to this group. They gave us gifts. They took us to meetings. I used to go to their meetings. I attended their meetings until one day they broke the news that only 144,000 were going to go to heaven. And I said, just a minute. Are you telling me after all this, I still don't know how I'm going to get there? And he said, well, that's what it says, isn't it? 12,000, 12 from every tribe and so on, and we got to keep working, we got to keep trying. I said, you know, sir, before you came, I didn't know where I was going. After you've come, I still don't know where I'm going. You can actually keep coming. You've lost me. I have no further interest. And you know, at that time, I felt so dejected. I really thought I had understood Christianity and rejected it. Little did I know, the voice of God was later on going to tell me, Ravi, I was there with you at that time, protecting you. I was there when you studied to keep your eyes open to the real truth.
Sometimes life can bring unspeakable pain, and though we can't always see the big picture that God is working on, it is there. And we can rest in knowing that He hurts when we hurt, and that He has plans to give us hope and a future.